I have often wondered if the majority of mankind ever paused to reflect upon the occasionally titanic significance of dreams, and of the obscure world to which they belong. Whilst the greater number of our nocturnal visions are perhaps no more than faint and fantastic reflections of our waking experiences, Freud to the contrary, with his puerile symbolism, there are still a certain remainder whose immundane and ethereal character permit of no ordinary interpretation, and whose vaguely exciting and disquieting effect suggests possible minute glimpses into a sphere of mental existence no less important than physical life, yet separated from that life by an all but impassable barrier. That was a mouthful. Welcome, ladies and gentlemen, to the Carr-Quest of H.P. Lovecraft. Today, we will be taking a look at Beyond the Wall of Sleep. So, Beyond the Wall of Sleep. This was a weird one. This was a really weird one. So, the plot of it is that it's basically about this guy who works at a hospital for the criminally insane, and there's this guy named Joe Slater, who is, at first I thought it was something kind of at first, like, I thought the description of him was like a tug at the collar kind of but it turns out no. He's a redneck from the Catskill Mountains. That's the only real way I can kind of describe him. That's who he is. And he's basically, something is going on in his body where it's like he's remembering things, like certain things, but then like in sort of bouts of madness, but then he comes back to reality and he's almost kind of normal again. So he's recalling all these things, and then he snaps back and he's like, excuse me, wait, what happened? And he's arrested because he killed someone in that bout of madness. And then he goes to the psychiatric, the hospital for the criminally insane, where the narrator is a doctor there who is interested in his dreams and looks into them and discovers what every Lovecraft protagonist eventually discovers. Although, not in a way that I thought he would discover it. Yeah, so this one is weird. That's all I can really describe it. It's just weird. It's a good story, like, it's a fascinating story. I'm surprised that, so I've mentioned in the past that Lovecraft tales are often use archaic language, which makes it hard to understand sometimes, to really fully comprehend, if you will, what's happening. But this is one of those cases, kind of like with Music of Eric Zahn, or Color Out of Space, or Call of Cthulhu, or Dunwich Horror, except maybe towards the end with Dunwich Horror, where it starts off like that, but then over the course of the story, I kind of read it and I'm like, oh, so this is happening, and this, and this, and this, and this. So it is pretty easy to fully comprehend and understand for the most part. It's pretty straightforward for a Lovecraft tale, which you don't see very often. So, what else can I say about it? It's just kind of, the only real word I'm using that's really coming back to me to describe the story is just weird. It's a weird story. And the ending, I think also what makes it so weird is the ending, which is not as bleak or kind of like, oh my god, reality shattering, typically anyway, as Lovecraft usually is. It's more weirdly bittersweet. Okay, I'm gonna have to go into spoilers. So spoilers for Beyond the Wall of Sleep. Here's the thing. If you don't want to hear spoilers, here's the where you need to skip to. And I will be spoiling the ending in 3, 2, 1. So, it turns out that in his dreams, Joe Slater is like controlled by some sort of alien presence that's like going after another one. There's like an enemy also, which is one of the things that Joe Slater in his rambling, raving state was like talking about. And the narrator, the doctor, finds he built this like telepathic radio thing that he hooks up to Joe Slater's brain, or to his head anyway, and he puts the other one. That's another thing. Dreams hooking up the dreamer and someone else to an apparatus that has some level of control over dreams or something to do with dreams. That is kind of like Inception, but not really. But I guess like that general concept of hooking up, and even then I'm sure that's definitely something outside of Inception, but I feel if you were to describe it to someone, the first thing they would think, Inception. But like technology, apparatuses to hook up to someone's brain to see their dreams. Or again to their head to see their dreams. So he does that, and then he does it over the course of time, and then it's slowly, Joe Slater slowly dies. And to make a long story short, the alien takes control of Joe's body for like a few minutes and explains itself, and is kind of like, oh, of all, just to imagine how grand and stuff that life is, and we'll meet each other again in ancient, Egypt or ancient Asia, or wherever else we may meet, and thank you for seeking me out and helping and stuff. And then Joe Slater dies, and then his like star, and it's like he said, like the enemy, he's given the enemy a name, like Al Ghul, which I think is astronomy stuff, which I can't really understand, which I'm not really acquainted with, I should say. And then the alien and then the alien leaves his body, and then it ends with an article excerpt talking about how there was a star named Al Ghul and another star, there was a bright light, and then you couldn't really see the stars anymore. That's the end of the story. That's the end of the story. And the main character doesn't really lose his mind. He's actually just sent on vacation by his boss, and it's just so weird to see a Lovecraft story end like that. I've noticed also a lot of these stories, maybe aside from a couple, don't really end with, except maybe Polaris, because Polaris kind of ends with that sort of thing, but like, it's weird. We haven't really had an ending so far of a Lovecraft tale, in the dream cycle anyway, unless I'm forgetting one, that ends as bleakly as something like Call of Cthulhu does, or Dunwich Horror does, or Color Out of Space does, or even Music of Eric Zahn does. So it's weird, again, to see that's the word that I use to describe the story most. It's weird. But it's good. It's a good story. Again, we haven't really come across any like stories that are like holy crap amazing. They're still good, but they're just kind of good. They're not like super amazing awesome stories, but they're just kind of good. I'm sure the next story and the next story after that, which I won't spoil quite yet because there's still a few episodes to go before we even get to that episode, which we'll get there. We'll get there in time. But I'm sure that'll change with the next story, but we're not there yet. Another thing also that it brings up, I brought up dreamers, and Lovecraft's description of dreamers. So dreamers, as we've sort of discussed the last couple episodes, are people who can sort of interact with, go to like almost a dreamlike world that sort of lives parallel or lives concurrently with our real world. And dreamers can, like, they have like maybe sort of dreaming ability, like like the ability to control their dreams somewhat. This one I've noticed has another element to it. There's also a lot of recognizable imagery from the real world in the dream world, but it's not all the way it's not all the way recognizable. Like I'm not quite. It's still dreamland, but it's also like, oh, I remember that, and I remember this, and that, and the other thing. So even in the dreamland, there are correspondences. There are connections between the real world and the dream world. So, that's cool. Yeah. So this was a pretty good story, Beyond the Wall of Sleep. Weird ending. Weird ending. But I liked it. It was different for Lovecraft. A lot of these dream cycle stories I find are very different from what Lovecraft does. There seems to be more like actual building of what a dreamer is, what the dreamlands are, that kind of thing, which is loosely there in the stories we covered last season with, again, Miskatonic University, Arkham, Kingsport, Innsmouth, that kind of thing. Miskatonic, I think I mentioned Miskatonic. So this was a good story. Not the best of Lovecraft, but it is a good one. It's a good, if I believe, Horror Babble in the audiobook said it was one of his early works, and it's a pretty good early work of Lovecraft. So if I was to rank it on a tier list, I would also probably give it an A. Maybe a high A, although, again, what I thought was the big oof description of who Joe Slater was, even though it wasn't, it is still kind of like, eh. And there are a few things, they describe Joe Slater they don't just describe him as like a redneck. They describe it, Lovecraft kind of is like, oh, he's a Catskill decadent. He's like a dullard. He uses language that's still not very not positive language to describe Joe Slater. But this is a fine story. It's probably, I think, because of its interesting development, I would give it an A. But again, just kind of that factor a little bit. It's just kind of A. It's not really high A or low A. It's just kind of in the middle, maybe. So that was Beyond the Wall of Sleep. And the next story on our quest through the Dreamlands is a famous H.P. Lovecraft story, The Doom That Came to Sarnath. We'll see you next time on Carr-Quest of H.P. Lovecraft. I am your host, Andrew Carr, and until then, see you next time.